Ambassador Axe had never felt so small. He sat in the human embassy station, his four eyes unable to meet the steady gaze of General Maria Santos across the polished table. Around him, 6 other coalition representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some had tentacles that curled and uncurled with nervousness. Others had feathers that ruffled despite the calm air. The counselor's crystalline skin flickered with anxious colors. They had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. The Galactic Peacekeeping Coalition had brought order to 17 sectors, ended countless conflicts, and created an era of unprecedented prosperity. They had done it through diplomacy, through measured force, through the careful application of sanctions and negotiations. Violence was always the last resort, and when it came, it was calculated down to the individual casualty. But they didn't care about calculations. For 8 months, the warlords had been tearing through the frontier rim like a plague. They didn't just attack peacekeeper outposts. They destroyed them slowly, deliberately, broadcasting every moment. They sent survivors back with messages carved into their flesh. They took hostages and returned them broken in ways that made death seem merciful. The coalition had tried everything. Economic sanctions meant nothing to warriors who took what they needed. Diplomatic isolation was meaningless to a culture that valued strength above all else. Proportional military responses only taught the what to expect next time. They understood something the coalition had forgotten in their of civilization. They understood that sometimes cruelty worked. They understood that fear was a weapon sharper than any blade. General Santos leaned back in her chair. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5.5 feet tall, with gray streaking through her dark hair. But there was something about her eyes that made Axe want to look away. They were the eyes of a predator evaluating prey. "Let me make sure I understand," Santos said, her voice calm and level. "You've exhausted all conventional options. They are systematically dismantling your authority in the frontier rim. Your forces are demoralized. Your member species are questioning whether the coalition can actually protect them. And now you've come to us." "Yes," Axe admitted. The word came out as a series of clicks that his translator rendered flat and emotionless, but everyone in the room could hear the shame beneath it. "Why?" Santos asked. "Earth has only been a coalition member for 15 years. We're still considered newcomers. Barbarians, some species call us, so why come to us?" The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Finally, the counselor spoke, her voice chiming like distant bells. 3 cycles ago, they raided a human mining colony, 442B. 73 humans died. Men, women, children. They recorded it as they always do. They sent the recording to human space expecting. We don't know what they expected. Fear, perhaps submission. "What did we send back?" Santos asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "1 ship," the counselor continued. 1 battalion, 400 soldiers. They found the raiding party on an asteroid base. What happened next?" She paused, her colors shifting to something dark and troubled. "The survivors limped back to their territory. They were physically intact mostly, but they were changed, broken. They won't speak of what happened. They call that asteroid base the Screaming Rock now. They have avoided human space ever since." Santos nodded slowly. "We don't fight like you do." "No," Axe agreed, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "You fight like or worse, that's what we need." The general stood and walked to the viewport. Earth hung in the darkness beyond, blue and green and white, beautiful and terrible. Humanity's cradle. A world that had spent millions of years teaching its dominant species that survival meant being willing to do whatever it took. "You're asking us to be the monsters," Santos said quietly. "You want us to do the things that would keep you awake at night. You want human soldiers because we understand something you've bred out of yourselves, something you've forgotten in your 3,000 years of peace and prosperity." She turned back to face them. "Fear is a weapon, and we know how to use it." A officer, Commander As, leaned forward. His scales rippled with distress. "We've reviewed your military history. Your world wars, your genocides, your capacity for organized violence is, he struggled for the word, staggering. You've killed more of your own species than most civilizations have lost in their entire histories, and you only achieved 200 years ago. Yes, Santos said simply. Doesn't that disturb you? Os asked. Every single day, the general replied. But it also taught us lessons you never had to learn. We know what works when nothing else will. We know how to fight enemies who respect nothing but strength. We know how to make monsters afraid. Axe's translator crackled as he spoke. General Santos, the Coalition Council has authorized me to make a formal request. We need human military assistance in pacifying the threat. We're prepared to offer significant compensation, access to our technology databases, preferential trade agreements, territorial concessions in the outer sectors. You're offering us bribes to do your dirty work, Santos observed. It wasn't a question. We're offering fair payment for services rendered, Axe corrected, though the distinction felt thin even to him. Santos returned to her seat. She picked up a data pad and scrolled through it for a long moment. The silence stretched. Finally, she set it down and looked at each coalition representative in turn. Before I give you an answer, I need you to understand something. Human soldiers aren't like yours. We don't do proportional responses. We don't fight wars to make a point or send a message. When humans go to war, we go to win. Completely. Decisively. In ways that make sure we never have to fight that war again. That's what we need, Axe insisted. Maybe, Santos said, but you need to understand what you're asking for. Our methods aren't clean, they aren't pretty. They work, but they leave scars, not just on the enemy, on everyone involved, on the people who ordered it done. She stood again, her hands clasped behind her back. I'll tell you a story. 200 years ago, during Earth's last major conflict, there was a city. The enemy had fortified it. Millions of civilians lived there. A traditional siege would have taken years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. So humanity made a choice. We developed a weapon that could destroy that city in seconds, and we used it. Twice. The coalition representatives sat frozen. They knew this story. Every species that studied human history knew about the atomic bombs. The war ended 8 days later, Santos continued. We saved millions of lives by taking hundreds of thousands. The enemy surrendered because they finally understood that we were willing to do things they couldn't imagine, that we would sacrifice our own humanity to win. She paused. We've spent the last 2 centuries arguing about whether it was the right choice. We probably will for the next 2 centuries, but it worked. Are you saying you'll use nuclear weapons on the? Os asked, alarmed. I'm saying that when you ask humans for help, you're asking us to make choices you can't make yourselves. You're asking us to carry the weight of what needs to be done so you don't have to. And afterward, when the war is over and you'll look at us differently. You'll remember what we're capable of. You'll wonder if maybe you invited a worse monster into your home. Axe felt his primary heart beating faster. Will you help us? Santos walked back to the table and placed both hands on its surface. She leaned forward, and for a moment, Axe saw something ancient and terrible in her eyes. Something that had climbed its way up from Earth's oceans, survived ice ages and plagues and predators, and learned that the universe didn't care about fairness or mercy. We'll help, she said, but I need you to do something first. I need you to say it clearly. No euphemisms, no diplomatic language. Tell me exactly what you're asking for. The room was silent. Finally, Axe spoke, his translator rendering his words with absolute clarity. We're asking humans to terrify the so completely that they never threaten the coalition again. We're asking you to be the monsters we can't be. Good, Santos said. Because when this is over, I don't want you to pretend you didn't know what you were unleashing. Don't tell yourselves you had no choice. You have a choice right now. You can walk away, find another solution, accept that the might win, or you can choose us. But if you choose us, remember that you asked for this. Remember that you knew exactly what we were going to do. The coalition representatives looked at each other. In that moment, they understood they were standing at a crossroads. One path led to continued aggression, more deaths, more territory lost, possible collapse of everything they'd built. The other path led into darkness, with humans as their guides. Axe made the choice. We choose you. Santos nodded. Then we have an agreement. I'll deploy our forces within 48 hours. We'll start with the stronghold on Theta III. You'll send observers to watch how we operate. You should see what you're paying for. As the coalition representatives filed out, relief and dread mixing in their hearts, Commander Oss paused at the door. General, may I ask a question? Of course. What happened at the Screaming Rock? What did your soldiers do to those raiders? Santos smiled, but there was no warmth in it. They taught them to be afraid. That's all you need to know. That's all anyone needs to know. The details don't matter. The results do. After they left, Santos stood alone in the conference room, looking out at Earth. She thought about what was coming. She thought about the young soldiers who would carry out orders that would haunt them. She thought about the who would learn what humanity was capable of when pushed. She thought about the coalition species who would sleep safely in their beds, protected by monsters they'd invited in. She picked up her communicator. This is General Santos. Initiate Operation Nightfall. Prepare Ghost Company for immediate deployment. Rules of engagement. Maximum psychological impact. Minimum actual casualties. We're not going to war with the... We're going to teach them to be afraid of the dark. The orders went out. Across human military installations, soldiers prepared for deployment. They checked their equipment, studied their targets, and mentally prepared for what they would have to do. They were humanity's answer to an ancient question. What do you send when you need to fight monsters? You send humans, because humans remember what it took to survive. Because humans never forgot how to be the thing that goes bump in the night. Because when you ask humans to fight, they don't just fight to win. They fight to make sure the enemy never wants to fight again. They were about to learn why the rest of the galaxy whispered about Earth. They were about to discover that there are fates worse than death, and humans knew every single one of them. Captain James studied the holographic display in the briefing room of the UNSC Harbinger. Around him, 30 members of Ghost Company sat in attentive silence. These were humanity's finest special operations soldiers, selected not just for their combat skills, but for their ability to think, adapt, and terrify. In the observation deck above, coalition military officers watched through reinforced glass, including Commander Oss and a half-dozen others who had been assigned to learn from human tactics. The hologram showed a massive fortress carved into a mountain range on Theta III. 8,000 warriors lived there, along with support staff and infrastructure. It was one of the largest installations in the sector, and it served as a staging ground for raids across coalition space. This is our target, said, his voice calm and measured. The coalition has been monitoring it for months. They've run 17 different attack simulations using their standard tactics. Every simulation ends with thousands of casualties on both sides and questionable chances of success. He rotated the hologram, showing various angles of the fortress. They built this place to withstand a siege. Thick walls, redundant power systems, 6 months of supplies, and defensive positions that cover every approach. A conventional assault would be a bloodbath. One of the coalition observers, a young officer, leaned toward Oss. How do humans plan to breach such defenses without heavy casualties? Oss didn't answer. He was watching Captain with intense focus. Smiled, we're not going to breach it. We're going to make them wish they'd never built it. He changed the hologram to show the surrounding terrain. Ghost Company will deploy in teams of 4, positioned at key points around the fortress. We will not attack the fortress directly. Instead, we're going to isolate it. We're going to make it a prison. I don't understand, another coalition observer said through their translator. How can 30 soldiers contain 8,000 warriors? By making them contain themselves, replied. He looked up at the observation deck. The coalition fights wars with numbers and technology. You calculate force ratios and tactical advantages. That works when you're facing rational opponents. But they aren't rational in the way you understand. They're warriors. They respect strength and they despise weakness. So we're going to show them something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what it means to be prey. The briefing continued for another hour, explained the operation in detail, and with each revelation the coalition observers became more unsettled. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. This was something older, something primal. When the briefing ended, Ghost Company moved to their deployment pods. Each soldier carried standard combat equipment along with specialized gear designed for psychological operations. As they prepared, walked among them, checking readiness. Sergeant Maria looked up from checking her rifle. Captain, the coalition folks in observation look like they're about to have a collective panic attack. Good, said. They should know what they're paying for. Do you think this will work, sir? Asked Corporal Tim Brooks, the youngest member of the team. Considered the question. Brooks, do you know why humans are good at this? It's not because we're smarter or stronger than other species. It's because our ancestors spent millions of years being hunted. We know what it feels like to be prey. We know what fear does to the mind. And we learned how to turn that knowledge into a weapon. He addressed the entire company. They think they're apex predators. They've built their entire culture around being the hunters, the strong, the feared. Tonight, we're going to teach them a lesson their ancestors forgot. There's always something higher on the food chain. The deployment began at 300 local time. 12 four-person teams dropped from stealth pods into the mountains surrounding the fortress. They moved silently through the darkness, using terrain and technology to avoid detection. Within 20 minutes, all teams were in position. In the Harbinger's command center, Captain watched multiple displays showing feeds from each team. The coalition observers crowded around, studying the screens intently. Nothing seemed to be happening. The teams were just waiting. Your soldiers aren't advancing, Oss observed. When will the attack begin? It already has, replied. At 3:15, Patrol Delta 7 vanished. 6 warriors who had been making a routine circuit around the fortress perimeter simply ceased to exist. Their communication signals went dead. Their life signs disappeared from monitors. There was no weapons discharge, no distress signal, no indication of what had happened. They were just gone. Inside the fortress, alarms began to sound. A second patrol was dispatched to investigate. They found Patrol Delta 7 11 minutes later. The coalition observers watched through intercepted communication feeds as the second patrol's leader began screaming. The images that came through made Oss's scales turn pale. The bodies of Patrol Delta 7 had been arranged in a specific pattern, a symbol from ancient history. It was a marker used by extinct predators that once hunted ancestors, a sign that meant, "This is my territory." But that wasn't the worst part. The bodies were positioned so that each one faced the fortress, and their expressions had been frozen in absolute terror. Whatever had killed them had done so while they were completely and utterly afraid. "How did your soldiers do that?" asked the observer, his voice shaking. "We studied psychology," explained calmly. "We researched their history, their mythology, their deepest fears. Every species has ancestral memories, things coded into their survival instincts. The remember being hunted. They just forgot they remembered." The fortress went on full alert. Warriors scrambled to defensive positions. Commanders shouted orders. Every weapon system powered up. They were preparing for an assault that would never come. At 4:20, every communication array in the fortress began broadcasting. The sound that filled the air made the coalition observers physically uncomfortable. It was a mix of things. An ancient war chant, recorded and modified. The screams of warriors, digitally altered to bypass rational thought and trigger primal fear responses. And underneath it all, a subsonic frequency that human researchers had discovered caused anxiety in neural structures. "You're torturing them," Oz said, his voice horrified. "We're not touching them," corrected. "We're just playing sounds. If those sounds cause distress, that's their neurology, not our fault." "That's a rationalization." "Yes," agreed. "War is full of those." Over the next 6 hours, Ghost Company systematically isolated the fortress. They didn't attack it directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they created an environment of constant, escalating dread. A guard would turn a corner and find a teammate dead, throat cut cleanly, with small cuts on the face arranged in the pattern of a human smile. A supply room would be found with all the rations contaminated with a harmless substance that smelled like death pheromones. Sensor arrays began failing one by one, sabotaged by infiltrators who moved like ghosts through the fortress's blind spots. They started shooting at shadows, at sounds, at each other. Their discipline crumbled under the weight of fear they couldn't rationalize or fight. They were warriors bred for combat, but this wasn't combat. This was a nightmare that wouldn't end. Pulled up a display showing the fortress's internal communications. Commanders were losing control. Warriors were reporting things that couldn't be real. Humans walking through walls, appearing and disappearing, moving faster than eyes could track. None of it was true, of course. Ghost Company was just very good at moving through blind spots and using darkness. But terrified minds filled in the gaps with monsters. "This is wrong," the observer said. "This violates every rule of warfare in the Coalition Charter." "Yes," agreed, "but it works, watch." At 1200 hours, 12 hours after the operation began, the fortress's main gate opened. Warriors poured out in a disorganized mob. They weren't retreating tactically. They weren't advancing to engage. They were fleeing. 8,000 of the galaxy's most feared warriors were running away from 30 humans they'd never actually seen. They ran directly into carefully prepared positions where the rest of the human battalion had been waiting. Automated systems activated, creating walls of sound and light that channeled them into specific areas. Human soldiers appeared from concealment, weapons raised but not firing. "Surrender or die," the translated message boomed across the battlefield in the language. "You have 10 seconds." The Coalition observers expected a fight. They were famous for never surrendering. They fought to the death as a matter of honor. But these had spent 12 hours in hell. They'd been broken before the battle even started. Every single one surrendered. 3,000 had died in the fortress, mostly from accidents and friendly fire in their panic. The remaining 5,000 threw down their weapons. It was over in 17 minutes. The Harbinger's command center was silent. The Coalition observers stared at the displays in shock. Commander Oss turned too, his expression unreadable. "You killed their courage before you killed their soldiers," he said quietly. "Yes," confirmed. "That's how humans fight wars we intend to win. We don't just defeat the enemy in front of us. We defeat the enemy's will to ever face us again." A priority message came through from Coalition Command. Oss read it, then looked up with something like awe in his eyes. 7 other strongholds in the sector have received reports of what happened here. All 7 are evacuating. They are withdrawing from the entire sector without further engagement. "One battle," Oss whispered. "You won an entire sector with one battle." "No," General Santos said, appearing via hologram. "We won it before the battle started. Once you understand what truly terrifies your enemy, you don't need to fight wars. You just need to remind them that you could." She looked at the Coalition observers. "This is what you paid for. This is what human soldiers do. We studied we learned their fears. We weaponized those fears and deployed them with surgical precision. The actual fighting was almost an afterthought." "But at what cost?" asked the observer. "Your soldiers, the things they did." "Will stay with them forever," Santos finished. "Yes, that's the price. That's what we carry so you don't have to. Every human soldier who participated in this operation will have to live with what they did. Some will need counseling, some will have nightmares, some will question whether they're still the good guys. She paused. But they are beaten. The sector is safe, and thousands of coalition citizens who would have died in a prolonged war will live. You got what you asked for. Turned to his soldiers. Ghost Company was returning to the Harbinger, their mission complete. He could see it in their faces already, the weight of what they'd done settling on their shoulders. They'd crossed lines that coalition forces would never cross. They'd become the monsters so others could sleep safely. That night in the Harbinger's mess hall, Satwith and Brooks, they ate in silence for a while. The coalition observers looked at us like we were demons, Brooks said finally. We are, replied, that's the job. Doesn't make it easier. No, agreed. It doesn't, but remember why we do it. Remember that every warrior who surrendered today is a coalition citizen who didn't die tomorrow. Remember that sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and chaos is someone willing to visit hell and come back. Brooks nodded slowly. Do you think they'll call on us again? Thought about the looks on the coalition observers' faces. Fear, disgust, gratitude, horror all mixed together. Probably. The galaxy's a dangerous place. They'll need us again. The question is whether they'll admit it. 3 weeks after the Battle of Theta III, the war ended. They didn't go through traditional diplomatic channels to surrender. They didn't negotiate with the coalition. They sent a single ship directly to human space with a simple message. What are your terms? The coalition was jubilant. Celebrations erupted on core worlds. Parades were held. Humans were hailed as saviors. Coalition media called it the quickest resolution to a major conflict in recorded history. Some species composed songs about the legendary human warriors who had saved the frontier rim. Others wrote academic papers analyzing the psychological warfare techniques that had proved so effective. But on the Harbinger, in the quiet of her ready room, General Santos read reports that would never be included in the official records. Reports about what Ghost Company actually did in those mountains. Psychological operations that crossed lines the coalition didn't even know existed. Interrogation techniques used on captured to extract the information needed to create those authentic terror sounds. The trophies taken from dead enemies that weren't just for psychological effect, but became something some soldiers needed to take. She'd approved every action, every technique, every line crossed. She'd done it knowing the cost, and she'd accept that cost for the rest of her life. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Captain entered and stood at attention. You wanted to see me, ma'am. At ease, James. She gestured to a chair. The coalition has officially requested human military advisors to train their forces in our tactics. Sat slowly. What did you tell them? Nothing yet. I wanted your input first. You commanded the operation. You saw what it did to our people. She leaned back. Should we teach them? Was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if they can learn it, ma'am. What we did at Theta, it wasn't just tactics. It was understanding darkness, understanding what fear does to a mind and how to weaponize that. The coalition has spent 3,000 years building a civilization based on rationality and measured response. Can you teach someone who's never known hunger what it means to starve? Can you teach someone who's never been prey what it means to be hunted? Good questions, Santos agreed. But that's not what I asked. Should we try? I think, paused, choosing words carefully. I think if we don't teach them, they'll just hire us to do their dirty work again and again. They'll use us as their monsters on call. But if we teach them, they might understand the weight of what they're asking for. They might develop their own capacity for strategic ruthlessness while maintaining their values. Santos nodded slowly. Or they might become like us, warriors who carry the weight of terrible choices. Is that so bad? Asked. Ma'am, I've been thinking about something you said before the operation. You said the strongest warriors are the ones who choose restraint. Maybe that's what we teach them. Not how to be monsters, but how to understand their own capacity for darkness and choose not to use it except when absolutely necessary. That's a very optimistic view, Captain. I try, ma'am. Later that day, Ambassador Axe requested an urgent meeting. He arrived with a delegation carrying elaborate gratitude crystals, artifacts worth more than most starships. Santos accepted them with polite appreciation, but she could see the tension in the ambassador's posture. "There's something else," she said. Axe's 4 eyes met hers directly for the first time since this had all begun. "General Santos, the Coalition Council is divided. We are grateful for what you've done, truly grateful. The threat is ended. The sector is secure. Lives have been saved." He paused. "But after reviewing the operational records, we have concerns. About our methods. About what happens next," Axe clarified. "Your species has spent its entire existence at war, with your environment, with each other, with the concept of death itself. You've weaponized fear so thoroughly that you deploy it like artillery. You've turned psychological warfare into a science, and it works. It works terrifyingly well." He leaned forward. "What happens when humanity has no external enemies to terrify?" Santos had been expecting this conversation since the day they agreed to help. "You're worried we'll turn on you." "Should we be worried?" She stood and walked to her viewport. Earth hung in the distance, beautiful and lethal. "Ambassador, let me tell you what humanity learned in our bloodiest century. We learned that the capacity for violence and the choice to use it are two very different things. Yes, we can be monsters. Yes, we understand terror as both weapon and strategy. But we also understand something your people seem to have forgotten in your 3,000 years of peace." "What's that?" "The strongest warriors are the ones who choose restraint," Santos said. "Every human who participated in Operation Nightfall had the training and authorization to do far worse things than they actually did. We could have slaughtered the We could have made examples so horrific that every species in the galaxy would fear us. But we didn't. We did exactly what was necessary to achieve the objective and no more." She turned back to face him. "You asked what happens when we have no external enemies. The answer is the same thing that's always happened. We'll keep being human. Some days we'll be heroes. Some days we'll make mistakes. Most days will be something in between, just trying to be better than we were yesterday." "That's not a reassuring answer, General." "It's an honest one," she replied. "Humans contain multitudes. We can be saviors or monsters, often in the same moment. What we are depends on what we choose and what circumstances demand. The Coalition can try to keep us at arm's length and hope that works out. Or you can accept that we're going to be neighbors, partners, and occasionally your conscience when you need someone willing to make hard choices." Axe was silent for a long moment. "The Council is voting tomorrow on whether to establish permanent human military presence in Coalition space or to limit our engagement to current treaty obligations. And what will you recommend?" The ambassador looked down at his hands, then back up at Santos. "I will recommend we accept the partnership. Not because I'm not afraid of what humans can do. I am. But because I think we need someone who understands darkness to help guard against it. We need someone who can fight monsters because they remember what it took to stop being monsters themselves." "That's surprisingly wise," Santos said. "War makes everyone wiser," Axe replied, "if they survive it." The vote came the next day. It was close, closer than anyone expected. Many Coalition species had watched the operational footage and been horrified. Others had seen the results and been grateful. In the end, partnership won by a narrow margin. Human military advisors would be embedded with Coalition forces, not to train them in human tactics, but to help them understand the psychology of asymmetric warfare. Cultural exchange programs would expand. Joint operations would continue under strict oversight. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. The meanwhile, formally sued for peace. They retreated to their territory and opened diplomatic channels for the first time in their recorded history. Fear had accomplished what centuries of negotiation could not. 2 months after the war ended, Santos gave her final briefing to the United Nations Assembly on Earth. Politicians and military leaders filled the chamber, all wanting to hear about humanity's first major military operation in coalition space. The mission was a success, Santos concluded, but we should never forget what we did to achieve it. The coalition asked for monsters and we delivered. We showed them what happens when you unleash humanity's capacity for warfare. They won't forget. More importantly, neither should we. A delegate from the African Union stood. General, are you saying we shouldn't have helped? Santos considered the question carefully. No, I'm saying we should remember that every time we use fear as a weapon, we become a little more like the things we're supposed to be fighting. We should remember that quick wars aren't always clean wars. We should remember that the soldiers who fought for us will carry the weight of what they did for the rest of their lives. She paused. The coalition got their peace. We got our reputation as the galaxy's most effective warriors. But peace bought with terror is still bought with blood, even if most of it stays invisible. Another delegate, this one from the Pacific Alliance, asked, "Will we be called upon again?" "Almost certainly," Santos replied. "The galaxy is a dangerous place. There will be other threats, other crises where the coalition's gentle methods won't work. They'll call us, and we'll have to decide each time whether the cost is worth the result." "And how do we make that decision?" Santos smiled sadly. "The same way we always have. We look at what's at stake, we count the cost in lives and souls, and we make the best choice we can with the information we have. Sometimes we'll be right. Sometimes we'll be wrong. But we'll always be human, and that means living with the consequences of our choices." The briefing ended. Santos returned to her office and found a message waiting from Captain. Ghost Company had been awarded the Coalition's highest military honors. There would be a ceremony next month on the. Every major species would send representatives. She wondered if her soldiers would attend. Some would, certainly. They'd accept the medals and shake the appendages and smile for the cameras. Others would decline, unable to face the praise for actions that haunted them. Both responses were valid. Both were human. That evening, Santos stood in her apartment and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, warriors were telling stories about the humans who had broken them. Coalition citizens were sleeping safely because monsters had done monster things on their behalf, and human soldiers were trying to reconcile what they'd done with who they wanted to be. The story of how alien peacekeepers begged for human assistance was already spreading across the galaxy. Some species told it as a tale of salvation, others as a cautionary tale about the price of peace. Human philosophers debated the ethics. Human soldiers stayed quiet about the details. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity had proven something important. They'd proven that sometimes, to preserve civilization, you need people who understand barbarism. Sometimes, to protect the light, you need those who can navigate the darkness. Sometimes, the only way to defeat monsters is to send something they fear. And the most terrifying thing about humanity wasn't their capacity for violence. It was their understanding that violence was a choice, not a necessity. They could be gentle or brutal, merciful or ruthless, depending on what the situation demanded. They could walk the line between civilization and savagery because they'd done it for their entire existence. They had learned that lesson the hard way. The coalition was still learning it, and humanity was teaching it, one careful step at a time, hoping that in the end, everyone would understand. The greatest weapon isn't the one that can destroy everything. It's the one you choose not to use until you have no other choice. Santos finished her drink and went to bed. Tomorrow there would be more meetings, more decisions, more consequences to manage. But tonight, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, humanity had found a way to be both the monsters the galaxy needed and the heroes they wanted. It was a delicate balance, one that would require constant attention and countless difficult choices. But then, humans had always been good at impossible balances. They'd walked upright when it would have been,